Hey guys, my name is Cameron Pierce, and today I'd like to talk to you about a book called Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And quick disclaimer for those that haven't read the book, I'm going to be going in depth into plot synopsis, character development, themes, and various other topics. So if you haven't read this book yet, then go ahead and turn this video off because I'm about to ruin it. Before diving into the real important aspects of what makes this novel, I want to give a quick plot synopsis as to what this story is about. And the story details the misadventures of a nameless protagonist who is constantly led astray by those more powerful than him. It begins with a prologue in which it shows the narrator in present day and ends with an epilogue in the same fashion. The story of the entire novel is played out in between the prologue and the epilogue. In this story, our narrator is brought to a southern institution for higher learning for African Americans. From here, he is suspended, then he moves to New York City, where he joins a mysterious organization known only as the Brotherhood. From here, he finds himself overcoming many strange trials until he is finally brought to his ultimate realization of invisibility, in which the entire book is basically a story leading up. Alright, with plot synopsis taken care of, I'd like to quickly spell out the important topics that I'm going to be covering in this video. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the characters in the novel, because I think the characters play a more important part throughout the story than the narrator does himself. With that being said, I believe that the narrator was never really himself other than the prologue and the epilogue. In the actual story, he was whatever identity others placed onto him, so I'd like to take a while to discuss that. Secondly, I'd like to discuss the underlying trends and themes throughout the novel, such as Sambo dolls, veils, and biblical allusions. Thirdly, I'd like to cover the major steps the narrator takes towards invisibility. These are major turning points, changes in tone and attitude, and the last thing I'd like to cover is, even though this novel was written over half a century ago, it still has themes that are resonant in today's society, and that's one thing we really have to talk about. So with the characters of this novel, I would like to talk about them as they come to the story in chronological order. The first of these being Bledsoe, and Bledsoe is the president of the college that our narrator attends, and he's obviously some sort of Booker T. Washington knockoff. Our narrator strives to be just like Bledsoe and have power over the white people, just like Bledsoe, but throughout the story, or the narrator's tenure with Bledsoe, we see Bledsoe putting on a mask to speak to white people, and it even says that he would hang every last Negro if it meant keeping his place amongst the white people. And to me, that was really powerful in explaining what kind of person Bledsoe is. He's an obvious sellout of his race and not a respectable man whatsoever, but our narrator fails to see this. And our narrator continues to blindly chase after Bledsoe's image, in which he does everything he can to walk a straight line, yet is ultimately fooled and betrayed by Bledsoe in the end. Jim Trueblood, a southern black farmer on the outskirts of the college campus, and a war veteran that our narrator meets, both represent our narrator's black heritage catching up to him. While our narrator was very embarrassed at the image of Jim Trueblood because Trueblood embodied all the typical African American stereotypes, it was really the words of the veteran that spoke to me more than anything. He meets this veteran on the bus on the way to New York City, and when he tells the veteran of his plans to go to New York City, the veteran tells him that New York City is not a place, it's a dream. That back in his day, it was Chicago that all the little black boys were running to, and he says it's out of the fire and into the melting pot. He also says to the narrator to play the game, but not to believe in the game. And to me, with these words of advice that the veteran is giving our narrator, he sounds like somebody who's gone through pretty much the exact same trials as our narrator. He's an educated man who went to the big city, and now he's just he's going to an insane asylum, so apparently he's thought of as insane by the, well, white society, I suppose. But if our narrator had just heeded and understood at the time these words that the veteran had said to him, I think he could have saved himself a lot of trouble in the end. Brother Jack is the next major character whose influence led to our narrator's transformation into an invisible man. Brother Jack is the leader of an organization known only as the Brotherhood. He recruits our narrator to be a mouthpiece for the Brotherhood's ideology in the black community of Harlem, New York. He literally gives our narrator a new identity and new name and tells him not to act on anything unless the Brotherhood approves prior. When Harlem is no longer deemed important to the Brotherhood's advancement, it and our narrator sacrificially cast aside as if they were a small pawn in the big picture of a game. Once again, our narrator has been completely led astray while thinking that he is helping his people towards the right path. The next characters I'd like to speak on are Clifton and Ross the Extorter. I chose to put both of these together because I think both Clifton and Ross the Extorter both exemplify our narrator's black heritage. Once again, our narrator is constantly surrounded by characters that support his black heritage or in some ways mirror his black heritage. And with Clifton, he's another member of the Brotherhood who seemingly openly struggled with his God-given black heritage and his artificial white identity. Ross the Extorter is a black nationalist in Harlem, New York, who uses violence to achieve his means. On multiple instances, our narrator runs into the influence of Ross the Extorter's words, and in one of these instances, it was him and Clifton that heard Ross the Extorter speak. While the words didn't necessarily have or seem to have an effect on our narrator, they did seem to take a great effect upon Clifton. Clifton ended up screaming at Ross to shut up and got very angry with him at his words, while our narrator just kind of calmly stood by. And after this exchange, it can be noted that Clifton didn't come around anymore. He was banned from the Brotherhood, and it can be seen later on in the novel that he basically loses his sanity over the division of his white identity and his black self. The last character I'd like to speak on is Mary. Mary allowed the narrator to stay with her for free after the narrator had been kicked out of the men's house. And the reason I want to speak on Mary last is because she represents a different kind of character than anyone else in the novel. She didn't necessarily display influence over our narrator, but she rather nurtured him and led him towards the direction that he really should have been going. And she was the only one that actually accepted the narrator for who he was and cared for who he was. And unfortunately, as goes with most of the story, the narrator didn't pay any attention to this and was too caught up in his deeds with the Brotherhood to really pay attention to the fact that Mary was the only one that actually truly cared for his future and what he could do for the black community. Throughout the story, we see the common reappearance of veils of deception. This can be seen in the statue on the college campus of Booker T. Washington placing a veil over a kneeling black man. It can be seen when the narrator becomes fascinated with a picture of a bull being led astray by a red cape, and a veil was actually literally placed over our narrator's eyes in a boxing match. This is done to symbolize that throughout the entire story, black males are covered in a veil in which white society is placed over them and are blindly being led towards the goals and aspirations of white society rather than the furtheration of their own race. Another common theme that we see throughout the novel is the reappearance of a Sambo doll at major turning points throughout the narrator's misadventures. It is first seen or heard of in the boxing ring when somebody calls him Sambo. It is also seen when he's leaving Mary's house and he can't get rid of it. And lastly, it is seen at Clifton's death, where Clifton is playing with the Sambo doll in the streets. And the narrator ends up picking up this doll and putting it in his briefcase. These two themes that I just talked about represent themes that are still active in society today. in regards to racial issues. Um, the first being placing the veil over the black man's eyes to lead him down a white man's path. Uh, I think that is representative in our educational systems, even still today, in that our educational systems are set up for basically for low income black families to stay low income black families and high income to middle income white families to succeed at a much higher rate than black families. Another issue that I see in our society today that's represented by a theme in this book, represented by the Sambo dolls, is our tendency to see black stereotypes and the fact that no matter what a black man does, he is always still somewhat followed by these black stereotypes, at least in the eyes of white society. With all that being said, it is no wonder how Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man has stood the test of time as an impenetrable classic that carries messages that can still and should be applied to racial issues even 60 years down the road.